I didn't even see you there. Goodness gracious, gave me a scare. Welcome, welcome. I'm Allison, and today I'll be teaching you a little bit about medieval pageant masters. Ooh, bet you don't know too much about those. Well, no worry, I'm here to help you. Back in the day, the medieval pageant master was a combination of today's modern day director and stage manager. The modern day director has a lot to do, and so does the stage manager. So you can only imagine combining those two jobs is quite tricky. So first of all, I'm going to explain what each of those jobs entails, and then I'm going to go through a brief synopsis of what a pageant master would have to deal with on the regular basis, from scenery to lighting to all of these different elements that they had to deal with. So the modern day director, they have to deal with creating an artistic vision for their play and assembling a crew and a cast and everybody who they believe will be fully capable of achieving that artistic vision. And then the stage manager, they're in charge of making sure that actually happens. The director has all of these dreams and hopes and just the great creative drive for this, and they worry about the actors and making sure those are staged and their overall vision. And the stage manager deals with that nitty-gritty technical stuff and making sure everyone stays on their P's and Q's and there are no hurdles anywhere for them, the director, to encounter. So the medieval pageant master, it's a pretty hefty job. Some of the very few things they had to deal with were lighting, scenery, their special effects, their finances, and even dealing with pageant wagons themselves. But do you know what they didn't have to deal with? Costumes. That was the actor's job. So, thinking about the lighting here, let me just reference this. The lighting was very different than it is today. Lighting had to be for both the audience and for the stage and actors. And do you know how they did this? They did this using candles, live flames. The pageant master had to deal with live open flames on their set and their audience all of the time. And they had to make sure that not only could the actors see, but they could be seen, and that they were in a safe environment for them to be able to perform the artistic vision. Moving on to the scenery. Pageant wagons, we all know about those. Those were the movable stages. Pageant masters were responsible for making sure those pageant wagons got from one place to another. But thankfully, they didn't actually have to obtain the pageant masters. That was the guild's job. Also, the mansions. If they were performing there, they were required to set up the space and make sure that the fabric cloths and the light were just right to invoke the proper mood, perhaps, for the setting and time of the play. Also, the platea. Platea was the neutral acting space, which, of course, you already know, but they had to make sure it was clear and ready for acting each time when they performed. After scenery, what else could we go to other than music? Music in the medieval ages. Isn't that funny? Was very different than it is now. It's very much more of like we think of in movies, an underscore, an overall mood to help with the artistic vision. The pageant master the duty was thrust upon them to make sure that they talked to the head of the orchestra, the conductor, to make sure that the mood and the music that was common for the day was appropriate for the play, and they would go through and make sure that everything was all in tip-top shape for the music. Now those actors, those pesky actors, pageant masters had that job of wrangling them in and making sure that they were staged and then in a proper, proper performance for each show, that they knew their lines, that they were staged, and that they knew what they were supposed to do. This is where some scholars start to disagree about the pageant master's duties. Many think, due to a popular painting, which I'm sure you all have read about in your theater history book, as I have, that there was a stage manager depicted in the painting standing center stage with a script in his hand, reading lines to fellow actors. Well, back in the day, in the medieval times, the pageant master was also in charge of making sure that the actors were fined when they didn't know their lines. So they had to be the bad guy, much like actors' unions are today. So the debate comes saying that if there are these fines in place, then why would the pageant master be on stage at all times reading lines to actors? They'd know their lines. They don't want to lose money. So, in that sense, there's a little bit of a question of what the pageant master does, but most scholars, and I myself, believe with accurate information that the pageant master didn't read the lines to the actors. But moving right along here, pageant wagons. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but let's readdress this one little nugget of information. Pageant wagons. They didn't actually have to procure the wagon or to keep up with it. They just had to make sure it got from point A to point B in the travels and that everything in it was safe. But the actual wagon, that was the guild's jobs. Ha! Lucky them. So the pageant master just merely made sure it got from point A to point B and that there were plenty of young strapping men to help move it. Wouldn't that be a sight? Oh, isn't that funny? So, we've talked about the scenery, the lighting, the pageant wagons, the actors. Let's talk about some special effects, shall we? Now, special effects today are quite different than they were back in the medieval ages. Pageant masters in the medieval ages had to deal with things such as burning furniture on stage or creating special effect halos with light or sometimes live animals coming out of trapdoors. Oh no! But that was all in a day's work for them. Do you know what they did for the burning furniture? They merely burned wicker furniture, pesky wicker. And for live animals, sometimes they substitute, if a script called for a tiger, they'd use a sheep. The little nuts. And for the halos, in depicting heaven and hell, as is very common in medieval theater, they would often use the lighting effects, perhaps sometimes reflecting the sunlight through a glass jar or some sort to create that ambiance, that overall artistic vision that they themselves had come up with. Isn't that great? And I've even lost my bandana. Well, if this wasn't enough for the pageant masters to have, let's just think about the finances involved with all of this. Paying actors, finding them, paying people to move things, paying people to do this. Do you know who that lucky job fell to? Most of the time, pageant masters. But, just so you know, in few cases, the guild actually did pick up this duty from the pageant masters and took a little bit off of their plate. It's funny. So, I hope you know more about the pageant masters of medieval times and how they probably had one of the hardest jobs in the medieval times. I mean, apart from that one guy who had to do that one thing, you know, during the medieval times. Thank you and have a good night.
I can't handle this.